My next guest is Dr. Tony Alessandra, and he is the founder of Assessments 24/7. And I am really excited to interview this gentleman. When I entered the National Speakers Association, he was one of the guys that we looked up to in terms of having great information. So whenever I think assessment, I automatically think of Dr. Tony. So thank you so much, Dr. Alessandra, for taking the time to talk with me today.
My pleasure, Lori.
So we got to start at the very beginning because I've always been curious to hear this story. I don't think you meant to end up as an assessment expert. I think somehow life happened to you and you must have listened to the signals. So tell me the story about how you ended up in this world in the first place.
Well, my life and my career is like a flow of water. It just kind of led me in different places. 1974, I was doing my doctoral dissertation at Georgia State University, and that's when I came across this whole concept of four-style models. And I wanted to do my dissertation on that, but my chairman of my committee told me not to finish your dissertation, and if this is what you really want to do, pursue it after you have your doctorate. So, after I got my PhD, I really got into sales training and professional speaking. I was a college prof for a while, at least through 1978, but then left and became a full-time professional speaker. But the assessment business was always an adjunct to my speaking business until 1996. And that's when I decided to put one assessment called the Platinum Rule online. And I was getting 10,000 people a month taking the assessment. And, after 4 years and almost 500,000 people, that blinding flash of obvious hit me. This is the business,
I think there might be something to this.
Yeah, my gosh, 500,000 people. I was letting them all take it for free. So I decided to start the business called Assessments 24/7 in 2000. Lucked out that my first client was Ken Blanchard Companies, which was a big client. And over the years, I've built up thousands of clients that are on my system, coaches, consultants, trainers, and corporations. And they use assessments primarily in the areas of personal development, team building, sales and leadership development, and a growing use now is employee selection.
Absolutely, which is why I was excited to add this to the platform that I'm putting together on customer service and staff development, because we can't deliver great service if we don't start out with the right people and
Exactly.
Knowing who are we hiring, how do they fit inside the team, all of that matters so much, and I'm just a huge fan of assessments. And so one of the things I wanted to do is try to help people navigate. There are so many options out there. Some are reputable and maybe some aren't, and certainly I'd like to know a little bit more about your feelings about the particular tests that are out there and direction you could give people if they wanted to research more.
Yeah, there's a lot of very good assessments out there. I focus primarily on DISC, D-I-S-C, which stands for Dominance, Influence, Steadiness, and Conscientiousness, 4 basic patterns of behavior. It's an outgrowth from Carl Jung and his concept of 4 styles. Back then, Carl Jung wrote a book called Psychological Types, and from that came MBTI and came social styles and the DISC concept. So why do I like DISC? I like DISC because of its clarity, its simplicity, its practicality. It's arguably the most widely used assessment in the world, most widely used. Now, we can look at a concept such as MBTI, great concept by a mother-daughter team, Myers-Briggs. The problem, and I say it with great sensitivity, is that MBTI is 16 patterns of behavior. That alone is kind of difficult to keep in your mind. And each pattern is identified by 4 letters. So now I have to remember 4 letters.
I could never remember my 4 letters. I would say, am I at this? Am I at that? I can remember I'm a high D. That I can remember.
That's it. And so I love the DISC concept. we do thousands upon thousands and thousands of DISC assessments around the world every single month. So that to me is the go-to assessment. There are other 4-style assessments like Social Styles, Platinum Rule, Steve Shapiro's Personality Plus, which are, I guess, diamonds, clubs, hearts, and spades. There's True Colors. I mean, there's a lot of 4-style models, but none are as widely used as DISC. And there's a lot of providers of DISC. Why me?
Right.
Well, that's a good question. Thank you for asking that.
You knew I was gonna. You just beat me.
I asked that question, and I'll tell you why. Because my entire life, and particularly through school, I always pushed for 2 things with my profs or my teachers in high school, et cetera. And that was get out of the theory, make it simple. Explain it to me in simple terms so that I can understand it. I could grasp it. Okay, now I got it. How do I use it? So simplicity and practicality are the 2 big words that I use. I took that over into my business, not just as a speaker, but in the assessment business. So if you look at various DISC assessments from different providers, you will find that my DISC report has 2 major parts. Most competitors only have 1 part, and that is the DISC description of you, what you are like. Mine has 2 parts, descriptive and prescriptive, and it's almost about 50-50. Descriptive, this is about you based on how you answered the questionnaire, and prescriptive, how do you use it with other people? How do you identify somebody without having them take the assessment? And once you identify them, how do you use the concept, whether it is as a coworker, a parent, a teacher, a salesperson, a leader? How do you use this concept? And we even have a DISC service assessment. And that is, how do you use the concept when you are in the customer service business? So, we have a lot of variations: DISC sales, DISC leadership, DISC service, which is a really good one, DISC coaching. So how to use it, that application, a part of it.
Excellent. I remember the first time I was exposed to DISC, I was working in a large ophthalmology clinic, and an expert of some sort came in and did the assessment for us, the quick one that you do, where you're all in the same room. And then, of course, they did the move you to the quadrants of the room, right? So all the D's in one corner. And it made such an impression on me. I was a young professional at the time, and I looked around at the other people in my corner, and my first reaction was pride, because look at all these smart, they were high D's, they were all that kind, and the owner, the head doctor, he was a D, and I'm standing going, yeah, man, Ross and I are the same. And then I look across and I see this one corner filled with people that drive me crazy, right? And all of a sudden I started to realize there was really something to this, because they were driving me crazy because I wanted them to be like me. And it became a real maturing tool for me. And eventually I became a leader in that organization, that what can I learn about what those people had in common? And they were all very high empathetics, and they were very soft spoken, and it took them forever to get something out of their mouths. I'm always interrupting and talking too fast. And I realized that if I could slow my motor down, slow down my tone, try to engage with them in the way in which they wanted to be spoken to, I could be a better leader. And that made a huge impact in my life, which is why I think I still like assessments.
Yeah, well, it's an incredible concept. I believe at the very basic level, it is an incredible communication tool. Just as you were describing, it almost tells you how to speak a different language, a behavioral language, to the different styles. How does a D, which is your style, that's my style too, how does a D speak the language of an I, an S, and a C? This whole concept, I call it adaptability. It's no different than that age-old saying, when in Rome, it was the Romans. And that's the whole thing. It is such an eye-opener to know that these people are not behaving in a way to irritate you. That's just the way they are. And once you understand that, you can actually communicate more effectively. So it starts at the basic one-on-one communication level. Then it moves up into how do we work best in teams or groups.
Mm-hmm.
How can I be a better leader? How can I be a better salesperson? As a salesperson, how do I adapt my selling style to fit the customer's buying style? We move it up even above that to how do I use it in terms of employee selection?
Mm-hmm.
For instance, how do I choose the best salespeople? How do I choose the best service people? And of course, the best way to do that is to look at an organization and benchmark their best service people. And we create a benchmark for the ideal service person. And ideally, it would be company by company by company, because what works in one company may not be quite the same in another company.
You took the words right out of my mouth. That's what I was thinking, is that if we've been selling to one target market and we have the template of the perfect salesperson, but then we switch to a new market, we better not make the assumption that they slide over. We need to do our homework.
Exactly. I mean, even we did a study looking at auto salespeople, and we created a benchmark for the ideal auto salesperson in Memphis, Tennessee. Now, would that profile, would that benchmark be the same in Los Angeles?
Or New Jersey?
In Jersey? Hey, forget about it. No way.
We don't sell cars the same way in Jersey is what I'm thinking.
That's right. That's right. So, you know, the ideal is to do a benchmark by a company, by a particular, maybe even a particular geographic area, and use that benchmark when we are looking at candidates. We have the candidates take whatever assessment or assessments are best, and we match the candidate's profile against the benchmark. Now, I will tell you, Lori, there are situations where a single assessment like DISC can in fact be used in the employee screening and hiring process, but only as one piece of the decision process. Mm-hmm. It cannot be the only thing that we use. And I say that it shouldn't be more than 20% of what goes into the decision. There's the resume, there's the interview, there's the recommendations, there's the education, there's the experience. All of these things play a significant role. The beauty of an assessment is that we now have something a bit more objective. Mm-hmm. See, you know, when people send in a resume, what is it? A resume is a financial statement. I've heard this. A resume is like a financial statement with only the assets, no liabilities.
Ah, well put.
Think about it.
Yeah.
And in an interview, don't you think somebody puts their best foot forward? It's almost like being on a first date.
Oh, I know.
You know, and recommendations. Do you know if you give a bad recommendation of a former employee, there is a possibility that you can get sued? So even recommendations are sort of colored.
Yeah.
But an assessment tends to be objective. So,
and I think the other thing that's important to point out for people who are looking at assessments in terms of improving our own behaviors is that I want to make sure people understand that we don't want to use our intel as a way to be manipulative of others. So, okay, well, she's an I, so I know how that works. I'm going to treat her this way. I'm going to shade my words that way. I think that that's a huge mistake, because now it becomes a manipulative tool, where I see it as, what can I learn about my own personality? What can I improve about my own communication skills? Not to get my way, but to have that happy ground meeting spot. And I hope that people use assessments as positive as they possibly can, and not as a manipulative tool.
Exactly. One of the examples that I use when I give my keynote speeches is adaptability is not unlike you doing business in Western Europe, and one day you are in Italy. And if I understand the language and the culture and the customs of Italy, I'm going to be more successful. The next day, I'm now in Germany. What worked in Italy will totally backfire in Germany. I need to understand their language, their customs, their culture. The next day, I go to maybe Poland, very different, and so on. So just like you would logically. I mean, we all understand what works in Italy wouldn't work in Germany and vice versa. The same thing with disc styles. What works with a D may not work with an I or an S or a C. The other thing I wanted to mention about this whole concept of benchmarking and using assessments for selection is that typically multiple assessments are more powerful than a single assessment. There's no question that in some situations, a single assessment like DISC can work. I have one customer who for 40 years has been using DISC for a selection of salespeople, and they have a track record of what style works best in that environment. But that auto sales study that I told you about, what they used was 2 assessments. They used DISC and motivators. Now, motivators is an assessment that measures 7 basic areas that motivate you. Are you more altruistic? Are you more economic? Are you more
yeah, I think that'd be very helpful. I'm not familiar with that, so that's interesting.
Oh yeah, it's a great assessment. Here's the interesting thing. In that study, they found that salespeople with a high D style, and now listen to this, because this blew my mind, and a high altruistic motivator, which you would say, wait a second, are high Ds altruistic? Well, some high Ds are altruistic, but basically the high D focus, let's get things done, let's move it forward, and the high altruistic, I want to help you as opposed to sell you.
Yeah.
So really it was an eye-opener. And then I have other customers who very successfully use 3 different assessments for benchmarking, which is really sort of the gold standard, where they use DISC, motivators, and Hartman. Now, the Hartman value profile, now motivators, some people also call it values, the Hartman value profile, they are different. The Hartman value profile, which a lot of people call the HVP, measures a person's quality of decision making, their quality of thinking. All right. So I have this one company that uses all 3 DISC, motivators, and Hartman to select salespeople. They have an incredible track record of doing that. So, you know, any which way can in fact work. We just have to decide what works best, you know, for you. We even did a study of college students, and found that college students who have a high theoretical motivator are more likely to go straight through in 4 to 5 years, have a higher GPA, and not drop out of school. Low theoretical, more likely to have a low GPA and drop out of school.
Okay. I think studies of people is just the most interesting thing. If I had to go back to the very beginning of my career, I think this is where I would have landed, because it never ceases to amaze me, the different ways it can be used to help benefit our customers and help our teams. It's just fantastic. Now, Dr. Tony, I'm going to give everybody a link to your website and any other links that you think will be good. They're going to appear below the screen underneath us right now so that they can go and check things out. But as we finish up this interview, is there anything specific you would want people to keep in mind if what they're saying to you is, well, we're thinking assessments might help us a little bit in our organization, but, and then you never quite know what they're going to say next. What advice would you give to the people who are a little bit hesitant about, do we even want to get into all this?
Well, I would say, first and foremost, try it out. See whether the results you get with just a small sample of people are accurate results. And the key is, if you went to a doctor, Lori, and you said, you know, I'm really in some pain, my whole body is hurting me, and the doctor says, okay, here's a prescription I want to write for you. How confident would you be in that doctor? As opposed to a doctor who does a prognosis, who may in fact say, okay, let's do these tests, a blood test, an MRI. I liken assessments to being an MRI of the mind, of the inside. And when we can understand what makes somebody tick, we are more likely to positively influence them and positively communicate with them and positively motivate them. So I would say, yes, let's test it out. Make sure you are dealing with a reputable company, somebody who's been in the business for several years. Make sure that you deal with a company that has a great back-end dashboard so that you can manage your employees. See, just taking an assessment, Lori, where everybody, let's say, gets a disc or motivators or whatever, and it's a one and done. Oh, I'm looking at my report. Everybody kind of laughs and talks about it, and that's the end. Yes. I don't think that that's effective. For instance, in our system, and I'm sure that there are other systems that do this, our system saves the reports and allows managers, department heads, whatever, to do what might be called a collaboration report, where they could match two people, let's say you and me. They could do a report where your report's on the left-hand side of the page, mine's on the right-hand side of the page. We have to work together. Let's say we're not getting along. Right. It tells us how we can more effectively deal with each other. We can even look at teams and see how teams are working. What happens if I take this person out of the team and put this person in the team? Would that be a better match? So, using assessments should not be just a one and done. We should save them, and we should use them for team building, personal development, and as I said earlier, even selection.
I love it. And that is exactly what I wanted to hear. It can't be a one and done. It has to be part of our culture and our process for making things work. This interview couldn't have been any better. I so appreciate your time. So thank you very much for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me, Lori.